if you're just trying to start a garden, then you might have a question. And we're going to answer the listener question right now that's about starting a garden. So you're in luck. So check it out. We're going to answer this question here in about 2 seconds. Leonard, roll the intro because you're listening to the Backyard Gardens podcast. So we have a listener question today. It's a 2-parter question, but it will be done in one episode, hopefully. And if you'd like to send us in a question, you can do it 2 ways. One, you could become a patron, and then you could support the show, get 2 extra episodes a month, and send in your questions, and we'll answer them there. Or you can send them in through our website, backyardgardenstv.com, in the question box that we have. In that section, I don't know where it is off the top of my head. So you can do that, and we will answer them here. So you choose. But this is a good one. I like it. Mm-hmm. I like it. So this one comes from the website, backyardgardenstv.com. And Chelsea B asks, I have 2 12-foot long and 3-foot wide, 2-foot deep garden beds. I'm trying to fill as cheap as I can without compromising the health of my soon-to-be planted garden. Veggies, herbs, and some flowers that help with the pests. Sounds like you got a plan, girl. Mm-hmm. I'm growing in zone 5B in Nebraska, so I'd like to get everything in this Mother's Day weekend. Is it okay if I fill the beds with cardboard at the bottom, then wood chips and that have not broken down, compost, and then top with soil? So it's a 2-part question.
Say the last part again, one more time. Is it okay if
Is it okay if I fill the beds with cardboard at the bottom, then wood chips that have not broken down, compost, and then top with the soil? Okay, so let's start with the first part. Let's talk about not breaking the piggy bank. Mm-hmm. Let me sit back for this one.
Yeah. You want me to tell my story?
Yeah, because then I got a new story that nobody's heard yet. So go for it.
I got a bunch of stories. I got a bunch of beds. So not only is it starting a garden from scratch, but it could just be expanding your garden. And shout out to the Expanding Your Garden series that we released earlier this spring. I had to write down cardboard, wood chips, not broken down, compost, soil. So my story is in 2019 at the debut of the Front Yard Garden, I miscalculated and ordered way more soil than I needed. My beds are kind of similar in size as Chelsea B. Hey, Chelsea. So it's like 10 by 3 or something, and it sits like 1.5 feet tall. And so I shared this in particular because I filled the entire bed from the ground level up with straight soil, the soil that I ordered. And I didn't realize at that point that really wasn't necessary, right? So I could have ordered a lot less soil, paid a lot less money, and done any number of mixtures of things. So yes, you can fill the bottom with cardboard. I don't know how much cardboard you have. I don't know if there's some other purpose that she's using that for. It could be suppressing whatever's under there, but at 2 feet tall, whatever you put in that bed is going to suppress if it's weeds or if it's grass or anything that you're building on top of. Wood chips, I absolutely believe you can use, even if they're not broken down, because we're talking about like the first foot from the ground up that she's putting just filler in.
You're just going to go through and answer the whole question?
Oh, sorry.
Damn. All
right, so we'll come back around to the next 2 points because I actually have some concerns about that.
Yeah, no doubt. Jeez. So
I told you this was right up my alley.
Yeah. So first of all, there's one thing that you need to understand. You need to understand how to calculate the volume of your bed. And so the way you do that is length times width times depth. Break the depth down into the tenths of a foot. So if it's half a foot, it's 0.5, so on and so forth. So for her bed in general, she's going to need 72 cubic feet of soil. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now I just did my beds in my wild garden. I have a multiple of different beds. I have 2 4x8s and 2 3x6s, I believe. Mm-hmm. And they are all about 8 inches deep. So when I did the math, I needed 25 cubic feet per bed. Yeah. So I actually went and bought bulk soil. Mm-hmm. I did not go buy bags of soil. And I got it in the back of a truck, got it, delivered it, boom, filled up the beds. and it cost me about $50. I have another bed that is 10 feet by 8 inches by 6 inches. And it costs me, if you would like for me to do the math for you there, what I say, 10 by 8 inches by 6, that's 4 cubic feet of soil. It ended up costing me $50 to fill that up. So you can do the math there. There is a big difference. So buying bulk soil is the cheaper method, right?
Well, in general versus bag soil, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the first part of the question. Now the second part is this. When I bought my soil for my wild garden, I did not get good quality soil. And I was a little bummed out. But then I had to think about it. And then the second part of the question feeds into that so well. So let's...
I do want to make sure we point out, your beds are how high?
6 to 8 inches. We'll just go in between.
Her beds are 2 feet tall, right?
Yeah.
That's significant, right? Shout out to you for protecting your back, right? So there's that, right? That's a benefit for tall beds. But if we look at, so where I was headed next, but if, I was answering the question. If you look at the height of her beds, I wouldn't recommend, and she's already there, like she's thinking of an alternative. I wouldn't recommend putting all soil in that, right? There's not a lot, unless you're planting trees, there's not a lot that's going to need 24 inches or 2 feet of soil to grow in, right? And then, again, that's kind of what, I don't know if I didn't realize that, or I don't know if I didn't think about alternatives and just wanted to have like beds of soil. But either way, I think that how much growing space, if we were doing calculations, is what you need to consider when it comes to if you're going to use filler, which I would describe as what she's asking about, cardboard, wood. And then she's actually talking about growing medium with compost and actual soil, right? So I'm going to go ahead and go on a limb and say she can, for calculation purposes, consider half of the space, 12 feet or 12 inches, a foot, the first foot from the ground, filler. And then on a good day, she could fill the second half with actual good growing medium, which I believe is a combination, as she described, of compost and soil. I wouldn't layer it in the way she's describing, though.
So, I mean, look, whatever you put at the bottom doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
You don't want to put anything toxic there.
Yeah, but as long as it's going to break down, you're good. So I always put cardboard down just to smother the weeds. It's easy. It'll break down within the year, and it'll just kind of give back. Wood chips, fine. A lot of people use sticks. A lot of times I'll use leaves. I'll put a lot of leaves down there. Generally have plenty of those. So you can do that. If you don't have that, I'll use hay. It's a very bulky substance. So I'll put it, get a bale of hay and throw down there. That's something else because, again, it'll break down and it'll use it. Now, layering, like you said, I mean, at what point what would you change about the layering? So let's do it that way.
So I think we're just going to bounce around here. So the first 2 layers that she's talking about, cardboard, which I've done for beds as well, and the wood chips. So I just replaced the wood chips in my front yard that I used as walkways. Right. So again, they're absolutely exposed to the elements. I'm walking on them all throughout the season. And I point that out because that aids in breaking them down. Right. And so there was still a lot of that layer of wood chips that wasn't broken down, but there was a lot of now soil. Right. So I said that to say, I see people put logs and things within their garden bed as filler, and that shit ain't breaking down. You know what I'm saying? Not anytime in the next couple of years, but that's okay. Even with the wood chips that are not already broken down, that's okay. It actually is going to be helpful, I believe, because it'll create kind of the air pockets, so you'll be able to even kind of have, if you have plants that go that far deep, they'll have somewhere at least to go, right? It could help with things like, not pooling of water and things. Now, if I go to the next layers, I wouldn't put compost on top of the wood chips, and I wouldn't put compost that far down into my mixture. Again, I'm making up the idea of 12 inches of filler and then 12 inches of good stuff, because most things are going to grow and at a maximum 12 inches, right? A lot of stuff is going to grow with less growing medium is what I'm trying to say here. So I'd actually use soil and then have my compost, as Ben was gesturing, closer to the top. Right. It's going to work itself down as, your season goes on, but I wouldn't start at the bottom, because what's going to happen? A lot of it's going to sink down into that filler section that you have, and your plants
and then
will
you're
benefit
just going to be
from it.
feeding the wood chips.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. So like when I did my wild garden, I put the cardboard down, and then I put the hay down, and then I put the soil down, and then I put compost down. So I put my compost on top. I think it's like 6 one way, half a dozen the other, honestly, but the benefits just don't really get the plant, which is what you're concerned about.
Yeah.
I've seen people do, like you said, where they put like big logs in there, and first I'm like, all right, dog, you are talking about some catch bait stuff, some clickbait stuff. I get it. I get what you're doing. That's not how you're going to do it. I mean, if you're going to put a log in there, like, break the log up. You want it to break down in a decent amount of time.
Well, you also
this is going
want
to
there to
feed the
be
garden for 10 years. Like, who gives a crap? I'm going to be putting compost in it the whole time anyways. So.
You also want it to be level, right? Or it needs to be somewhat level. Let's say that. It doesn't have to, you don't need like, what's the thing called? Your leveler? You don't need that. But, when it comes to things like big pieces of, material, you're going to have soil that sinks in one space and not in another. So while I wouldn't do this for the size that she has, because I just don't think I have this much material, for those that are listening that may have a smaller bed, because I hope that we've answered Chelsea B's question in one way or another. But for those that may have a smaller bed, what I've done for a couple of mine is I use a lot of containers, and I have a lot of container mix, whether it's purchased, whether I've mixed it myself. It's something that is not as heavy as your regular garden soil, right? That's very intentional. And so a lot of the nutrients that are in that mixture for my containers, it's pretty much tapped out by the end of the season, right? So you'll hear people refer to it as spent potting soil. So I have beds where I've put cardboard as the first layer, right? And then I'll just dump out a lot of my spent potting soil. Now, there are ways that you can revitalize that soil. So don't think that it's just something to be wasted. But at some point, I run out of spaces and material and all that stuff. So anyway, cardboard, spent potting soil. Then I came back in with regular soil, right? Because this is a raised bed. Then I came back in with a layer at that point of compost, because I'm almost to the top of my bed. And maybe another like thin layer of actual soil again, like real soil.
Right.
So that's what I've done for smaller spaces. And that logic still works. You may just swap in and out what that thing is,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, filling a bed doesn't have to be an exact science.
Yeah.
The bottom line is you need soil for the plant to grow in. Mm-hmm. Like, I use crappy soil. I wasn't that concerned because, one, I just bought, I used my compost that I made, but then I ran out of compost that I made. So I had to buy. And I just put like a bag of compost in each bed. And when I plant, I've just released a video about planting tomato plants and how I do it. I put a handful of compost in. And then I put a handful of compost on top. And then I put my mulch on top, and all that breaks down. So like the first year, you might have not so desirable soil, but you can fertilize and you can amend a little bit, add an extra bag of compost. But after the first year, like you're making it. You know what I mean?
And it'll likely produce in the first year. One episode you asked me if I used to put a handful of compost when I planted. And interestingly enough, I never did, because I've only started using compost like in the last 5 years or something. It's about right, last 5 years. And so I used to actually put fresh garden soil in my planting. So if I have like, back then in the very early days, I would just have like soil, like, not even in raised beds. And so I'd work up that space, and that's what I still do. And then when I'm planting a tomato plant, I drop in some fresh soil, right, with all of its goodness. And then I plant that plant. But this year, again, I've done a much better job over the years of amending my soil and, feeding the soil. But what I've done in more recent years also is like just layer in compost like on top and then work it in. But this year, what I actually plan on doing is your approach where I'm not adding as much compost all throughout my beds, especially my larger ones. Instead, what I'm doing is putting in, like you said, a handful as I'm planting these various things. It works out a little bit different if you're direct sowing seeds, but definitely if you're putting transplants in, I'm doing that instead. Because I also don't want to kind of waste the compost. I'm only growing so many things in that space, so.
Yeah, you don't want to waste anything. And I mean, the goal is to get this bed active and moving and not be broke in the process. Yeah. So, buying bulk soil can be tough. You just find anywhere that is, that sells mulch or something like that. Like by bulk, like a lot of times they'll deliver truckloads. And you can get them to deliver a truckload, or you can take your truck to them.
One recommendation with that, though, is, and most places will let you, go visit that space. I know it feels kind of awkward, right? But there's a cheap version of everything that's being sold. You know what I'm saying? So take a look and see what pile they're going to pull your soil out of. And, a lot of us kind of, I don't want to get into like what good soil looks like and feels like, but look into that, if you're not familiar with it. And then once you make that visit, you can decide whether or not, because it's still not cheap to get a bulk delivery. It's cheaper in most times compared to bag soil and almost all times, but you're still spending dollars,
The cheapest way to do it is get a friend with a truck to go get a truckload of mulch and then bring it home. That's the cheapest way. You cannot tell how good soil is by looking at it. You can tell how good the drainage is.
You can tell how bad soil is by looking at it.
Yeah, if it's got a bunch of crap in it. But you can also, when you talk to people, say like, hey, I need some soil for my garden. And they know, okay, because there's fill soil and then there's garden soil. And so they'll be able to hook you up. And I mean, just fill the bed up, dude. And just know that like every year you're going to be adding a little bit more to it. Hopefully you're making compost. It sounds like Chelsea is doing, it sounds like she's actively doing something with compost. So, the more of that you make, the more you can add in, the more mulch you use. Like that stuff, like legit breaks down over the course of a garden year. Like I'm going to go out there in the next couple days and I'm going to take a picture of my mulch that I put into my tomato bed. And then I'm going to come back at the end and nobody's going to care about it. And nobody's going to give a damn about my tomato bed mulch. I'm going to come back at the end of the year and I'm going to show another picture of it. And you're going to see how much is broken down. And it's crazy. Like I noticed it last year. And then when you do that, and then next year you put your compost on top. And then you put your leaves on top in the fall. And then, and so you're building these layers all the way through. And it's just, it makes for good gardening medium
practices, and
practices.
So if I look at the things I've used as mulch, because that's one of the pieces we were talking about, I've used wood chips. I've used over various years. I've used leaves. I've used straw. And as of this recording, my favorite is leaves, shredded leaves. Yeah,
I use leaves and straw. I've used all of them like you have, but those are my favorites. I use the leaves in the fall. And then I put the hay on top because I like the aesthetics of it. And look. First of all, I'm going to spend the last minute and I'm going to say this. This space is a happy space. Okay? Batavia and I are happy gardeners and we're happy to share our knowledge with you. If you come on to our YouTube channels and how dare you say something nasty to us about our gardens, it's not cool, dog. Like we're here to spread the love. Trust me, we know what we're doing. And yes, I'll put straw into my garden. And yes, it will come up and it will sprout, but it's easy to pull up. So a lot of the times there's things that are mismanaged and they become out of control. And that is the issue. So when we use these things, just know that there's a way to kind of, if you have an issue with something like when it comes to mulch and stuff, then you can kind of manage it by staying on top of it a little more. Like, for instance, I put in my leaves last year. Dude, I have little pine trees growing throughout my entire garden. It's so ridiculous. It takes 3 seconds to pull them up. Not a big deal. But it looks like I'm growing a pine tree farm in one of my raised beds. It's stupid. So just stay on top of it and be kind, okay? Yeah. Everybody fill your beds up good. Wait, go.
Can anyone, if you're watching the video,
Oh yeah, that's right.
Be kind. Yeah.
I
We're
forgot.
saying it and wearing it.
Yeah. All right, everybody. So without further ado, we love you guys and we want you to grow more. If you're filling a bed, feel free to use these methods that we've talked about. And thank you for being with us. Send out your questions to either backyardgardenstv.com under the question section, or you can become a patron and just message them to us, and we'll get back to you on Patreon and we'll share them with everybody. Because these questions really do help people. I believe they do, because they're the stuff that we don't think about. So, and with further ado,
see ya. See ya. See ya.
bye.